What I just done read.
Well met, fellow adventurers. Welcome back to my Bohemian Book Corner. This is What I Just Done Read, a book review show that attempts to give a fair airing to books of all ages, not just those on the bestsellers or the new releases list. My name is Max. Before we start, one thing that I forgot to do last time is marking off the last book we were looking at, which was My Bones and My Flute by Edgar Mittelholzer. So we will do that now before we start, which is here. That's another one off the list. Oh, that feels good. And we're actually going 3 up to where we are today. And we'll be looking at Roleplaying Mastery by Gary Gygax. Before we come to that, we'll start, of course, with our word of the day. And the word today is... I don't know, I've forgotten. I haven't. I'm just saying that for dramatic effect. Is matutinal, or some kind of variation of that, which simply means of or pertaining to or occurring in the morning. It's derived from the Latin word matutinus, meaning essentially the same thing, which comes from the name of the Roman god Matutia, who was the god of the morning and the dawn. So again, as always, please take that, make it your own, and find some way of wheedling it into your own writing. There's quite a lot to get through with this one, just in terms of my little author's biography that I tend to start these with. So we'll try and rattle through it as quickly as we can. It's mainly the highlights, of course. There is so much other stuff about Gygax's life that I haven't been able to include in this. Ernest Gary Gygax, born on the 27th of July 1938 in Chicago, to his parents Almina Burdick, otherwise known as Posey, and his father Ernest Gygax, who apparently was at one time a violinist for the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. He was generally known by his middle name Gary, which his parents gave him in honour of the actor Gary Cooper. By the age of 7, he and a group of close friends had formed a clique, if you like, not a gang, a clique, who are known as the Kenmore Pirates. Although they're absolutely not a gang, even though a year or so later they had a bit of a set to with another small clique of close friends, also not a gang, culminating in effectively a rumble. As a result of which his parents relocated to Lake Geneva in Wisconsin, which was where his mother was from and where she still had living relatives. Lake Geneva then is obviously his childhood home, and for the most part would be his permanent base for the majority of Gygax's life. While growing up in Lake Geneva, Gygax made a number of close friends, some of whom would have quite an important impact on his life later on, most notably Mary Jo Powell and also his lifelong friend Don Kay. Through his formative years up into his adolescence, that his love of gaming, and in particular wargaming, became more and more pronounced. Apparently by the age of 10, him and his friends were formalising and creating systems of rules for their general play. Some of those rules are still extant. Apparently a lot of them formed the basis of what we now know as live-action role-playing, or LARP. So yeah, apparently that's one of his as well. Around this time also, he developed a love of both sci-fi and of fantasy literature as well, fueled very much by his father. Amongst some of his favourite authors, you'd find the likes of Edgar Rice Burroughs, Jack Vance, H.P. Lovecraft, and Robert E. Howard. So that's where the barbarians come from, of course.
From Rhapsody 4 wins.
Certainly by his middle teens he was definitely wargaming. I think this is kind of quite cool, nice little anecdote that I found as well. Apparently just to liven things up between him and his friends, they'd employ firecrackers to simulate explosions on the battlefield and stuff, which is all kinds of awesome, really. So in 1956, at the age of 18, Gygax dropped out of school, being somewhat disillusioned with life in general following the death of his father. Curiously enough, a bit like the previous 2 writers that we've covered on this show, he attempted to join the military, in Gygax's case the Marines, and was deemed ineligible as he was diagnosed with atypical pneumonia. His dreams of becoming a real soldier dashed. He returned to Lake Geneva to live with his mother, and also got a job in Chicago with the Kemper Insurance Company, where he worked as a shipping clerk. He also made the acquaintance, or reacquainted, with a couple of his childhood friends, the aforementioned Don Kay and Mary Jo Powell. He was very quickly taken with the young Mary Jo, and after a very short courtship, the couple were married at the age of 19. Unfortunately, this did cause a bit of a tryst between him and Don, who had been pursuing Mary Jo at the time that Gygax reappeared on the scene. Although it does appear that they settled their differences reasonably quickly, Gygax and Mary Jo moved to Chicago, and whilst still working for the insurance company, Gary also studied anthropology at the University of Chicago. So, wheeling forward a few years, in 1966, Gary and Mary Jo and their young family, as they were now expecting their third child, moved back to Lake Geneva. By now, Gary had discovered a book called Little Wars, which was a rules of play for tabletop wargaming written by H.G. Wells. And this kind of inspired Gary to start thinking about making his own games. To facilitate that, and looking for something a little bit more diverse than just the standard six-sided dice, started looking at a number of platonic solid-state shapes to use as random number generators. Also at this time he was very heavily invested in the local wargaming community and was also starting to write articles on the hobby for various fanzines. The following year, along with other members of the local wargaming community, Gygax went on to found the International Federation of Wargamers, and one of the things that grew out of that is what we now know today as Gen Con. In fact, it was at the Gen Con in 1969 that he made the acquaintance of Dave Arneson, who again we will come back to in a few moments. In 1970, he lost his job, and in an attempt to make a living from his hobby, he tried a number of different attempts at monetizing his pastime. Unfortunately, most of, if not all of these, ended in failure. As a result, he was taking a number of different jobs, including cobbling shoes in his basement and also doing some editorial work for a company called Guidon Games. By this time, he and Mary Jo had a total of 5 children to feed as well. Whilst doing this extra work for Guidon Games, he used the information and what he was gathering from that to help fuel his own nascent games development, which culminated in 1971 with the publication of Chainmail, which was his own set of rules for a more fantasy-orientated wargaming experience. So towards the end of 1972, the aforementioned Dave Arneson approached him, mostly because he knew that Gygax was working for Guidon Games and thought it might have been an easy shoe-in to get an idea that he'd been working on into print, and that was called Blackmore, which was a campaign setting inspired by Chainmail, but rather than being a tabletop wargame, was what Arneson was referring to as a role-playing game. Gygax was very taken with what Arneson brought him, and they agreed to collaborate, and through the next year they put together what would eventually become first edition Dungeons & Dragons. So in October 1973, Gygax quit Guidon Games and, along with his childhood friend Don Kay, set up a new company, Tactical Studies Rules, or TSR. As neither of them had a huge amount of money, they felt that they would have to bring on a third partner. For this, they agreed on Brian Bloom, who was an acquaintance of theirs from the from the wargaming community. Don Kay was quite reluctant to bring Bloom on board initially, and as we will see, should have gone with his gut. Again, more on that in a moment. But the three of them went in as equal partners. With the company in place, and with 1,000 copies of Dungeons & Dragons being printed, they were ready to launch a completely new form of pastime, and in January 1974, Dungeons & Dragons hit the bookshelves. Within the first year, sold all 1,000 copies. Unfortunately, and again, it seems to be one of those things that seems to colour his kind of story. Multiple high points are also tempered with some quite terrible lows as well. A year after D&D was released, Don Kay unfortunately passed away from a heart attack, and having made no provision for what would happen to his shares in the event of his death, they passed automatically to his wife. His wife, unfortunately, had no interest in the company and was apparently quite standoffish about the whole gaming side of her late husband's life, and wanted nothing to do with it at all. she quite unceremoniously dumped all of Don K's wargaming stuff on Gygax's drive. Even though the company was starting to do some good turnover, neither Brian Bloom or Gygax had the money to buy out the shares from her. That being the case, they agreed that they would have to bring in another third partner to take over Don's shares, and Bloom suggested his own father. Just a year after its creation, Gygax found himself to be a junior partner in his own company. Wheeling forward again a few more years into the early 80s, obviously D&D took off and a series of supplements would follow, as well as new editions, although behind the scenes was a lot of internal strife, mostly to do with differences of opinion on the direction the company should take. During those few years, Bloom's father's shares passed on to Bloom's brother Kevin. Things had got so bad between the three of them that by the early 80s, TSR was split into two divisions, TSR Incorporated and TSR Entertainment. The Blooms, really wanting to be shot of Gygax and his input, convinced him to relocate to Hollywood to oversee the upcoming and what proved to be highly popular Dungeons & Dragons cartoon. It should also be noted that at this time, Gygax was also dealing with a lot of personal problems as well. His marriage to Mary Jo had fallen apart. A lot of it to do with the couple's religion. They were both Jehovah's Witnesses, and certainly by the early 80s, with the satanic panic taking hold and role-playing becoming a victim of that, they found themselves increasingly ostracised from their congregation. That eventually led to an acrimonious divorce between the two. Also, that coupled with the fact that Gygax, who had been a progressively greater smoker of cannabis during the 70s, had done what the authorities were always warning us about and had upgraded to cocaine. Don't want to touch too much on the time that he spent in Hollywood, but he seems to have a bit of a blast, and apparently was known as a bit of a Lothario, being seen in the company of several Hollywood starlets. And again, it's another example of his story here, where so close to achieving some really great stuff. In 1984, having just agreed terms with Orson Welles to star in a live-action D&D movie that was going to be produced and directed by John Borman, he received word that TSR was on the brink of insolvency. This came as something of a surprise to him because the company, on the books, they had a turnover of about $30 million a year. Forced to try and sort this problem out, he returned to Chicago and discovered that the company was just being terribly mismanaged, predominantly by Kevin Bloom. Excessive overstaffing, holding excessive inventory, and also, this is just ridiculous, trying to back some ludicrous projects through the company funds, including bankrolling the raising of a 19th century shipwreck. Gygax went to the company's board and they gave him permission to effectively oust the Blooms from the company. To facilitate this, he brought on board a company manager by the name of Lorraine Williams. And again, unfortunately, this is another terrible choice because Williams' first action was to buy out the Blooms' shares and then appoint herself CEO of TSR and quite publicly curtail Gygax's ability to have any creative input on the company. He tried to contest the buying of the shares from the Blooms in the courts, which ultimately failed, and in 1986, Gygax formally resigned from TSR. Almost immediately afterwards, he was headhunted by his friend Forrest Baker and offered the position of creative lead at Baker's company, Infinities Productions. It was while working for Baker that he was convinced to pen today's book. So, as we usually do, just a few bits and pieces here from the blurb. It starts with, discover ultimate mastery in any role-playing game. Now, for the first time, Gary Gygax, co-creator of Dungeons & Dragons and founder of TSR Incorporated, reveals his tips, tactics and strategies, true mastery of all and any role-playing games. Whether you're a novice or an expert, role-playing mastery has much to offer. You'll learn to create your ideal character, improve group dynamics, help your group accomplish its goals, assess your opponents, build a more exciting campaign, and much more. I'm going to do this how I normally do this. I'll give kind of like a bit of a general review. I'll then go and do my crafting bit with the eyes, and then we'll come back for some final thoughts. So he approaches the book by breaking it down into its kind of constituent parts, starting with what he thinks constitutes what you should be working on to become a master player, and then a Master Games Master. Hits the ground running with those. That makes sense. That's kind of what you'd expect from the book. I did think it was a bit odd, and again, I must admit, on first reading, I was like, well, what else is there to say? I mean, that's what the book says it's going to do on the cover, and you've done that, and you've done that by page 57 of a 167-page book. What else is there left to say? But he does, have quite a lot else to say on different elements of the experience, which I think maybe as players we kind of generally overlook. The rest of the book, he kind of focuses in on other moving parts, if you like, of the role-playing experience. Some work better than others, and some of them I do think warrant a volume of their own. I know there is a follow-up to this, which I might have a look at trying to get. The chapter on group dynamics is very interesting. I did quite enjoy that, especially the section on problem players. And anyone who's been a role player, when you read that, I'm sure you will come up with a few names who you can think, yeah, you fit into this category of problem player. We're talking about real problematic behaviours, not the kind of the modern day problematic behaviour from not adhering to
the message.
For stuff like that, I would direct your attention to the current Star Trek Adventures game by Modiphius Games, which, yeah, that's proper clown shoes stuff about role players' safe spaces. But anyway, sorry, let's put that to one side and carry on with the review. One of the things that's kind of not expressly stated at the start of the work, and really could have been, is that it's laid out essentially as a hierarchy of role-playing excellence. That's what he's trying to present here. So there is almost like an adventure here. There is a journey that you're going on from master player to master games master to potentially games designer, and if you achieve that level of mastery, then you can double down and try and explore the level of grandmaster. While it seems, or what is very much appropriate to the subject matter, I did feel that he could have stated his intent a bit better at the start. If that's the goal that he's going for, it just came a bit out of left field, because he doesn't make any reference to that being the kind of super objective until practically the end of the book. Whether that was the intent, I don't know, or whether it was just something that he thought of at the last minute and included. It's hard to say. It's just when I was reading it, it almost had the feel of a gotcha moment. It's like, there's a big reveal at the end, which didn't quite work for me personally. There's quite a nice section on games design. Again, though, it's one of the sections that I thought this really deserves its own work. You've obviously got a lot to say about this and have approached this quite analytically. There's some nice stuff in it, but again, I think that could have been extrapolated on a lot more in a separate volume. With regards to the actual product itself, it's okay. The typesetting and the font, are reasonably inoffensive. I thought they could have done more with, like with the headings and stuff. Some of them just feel like they just use up space that could have been filled with more lovely information. And the other thing that I thought with regards to this as well, considering that this comes again from one of the founding fathers of sort of modern wargaming, and also obviously of the role-playing as a hobby altogether, I think it really could have used the inclusion of some illustrations, maybe some setups from some wargames. I know this is more based on role-playing, but role-playing and wargaming do go hand in hand. And something visual to kind of fire the imagination of the reader would have been really nice, especially considering who wrote this book. I think that would have really lifted it off the page. Unfortunately, all we do get is the cover art, which is okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to very quickly now go and mess around with my eyes. So while I'm doing that, get yourself another flagon of mead from the bar, and don't touch that chest, it's probably a mimic. And I have returned from another successful quest. We'll come to the eyes In a moment, final thoughts, and thoughts, should I say, and recommendations. So, yeah, final thoughts. It's okay. From the research that I've done on Gygax, and also from speaking to my friend Derek, who is a friend of Gygax's son, Ernie, and used to roleplay with Ernie Gygax, I get the impression of a man who was very larger than life, and lived his life to the fullest. And this is quite muted. I don't get much sense of that from this work, and I'd even go so far as to say that the general prose in it is quite dry. Now, I know that kind of contradicts what I said earlier about this being like a technical manual for role-playing, but considering what that pastime is, including injecting some of his personality into this, is perfectly valid. Now, that might simply be because of when this book was written. As I mentioned earlier, this was written within a year of him quitting TSR and all of the anxiety and everything that would have come with that. And maybe that would explain it. And I did read a review of the book from around the time that it was published, and the writer there suggested that they found the book to be quite schizophrenic, in that he opens the book by saying this is a manual to teach you how to become a better player, and then proceeds to say that the best way to become a master role player is to be an experienced role player in a team of other experienced role players, and that's the only way that you can do it. And I can understand where this other writer was coming from, but I didn't think that was, that wasn't a problem for me. And again, so to build on what I was saying a moment ago about wanting to see more of his personality in this, as Gygax himself repeats several times in the books, the purpose of role-playing is to have a good time.
You was just looking for a good time.
And to have fun. And as such, that's more than enough justification for him to have injected a bit more of his personality into the work. On a similar note, it's heavily bereft of personal anecdotes and examples of things from his time as a role player. Those things would have been nice as well. I know it's not like a biography or an autobiography, but throwing in some examples to illustrate the more technical side of what he's putting forward would have been really nice, I think. The section on game design that I mentioned earlier is really nice, and his approach to the fundamentals of such an ordeal are really quite insightful. And that part, I do think, if you are ever thinking of designing your own role-playing game, then that section of the book, I'd say, is required reading. He knows his stuff, obviously, and shares some of that in here. Just the basics of what you should be looking at before you even put pen to paper. And that is fantastic. And, if I ever wish to do anything like that, I will definitely come back and read that chapter again.
Greetings! It's a pleasure to meet you.
There are a few places where it gets a bit jargony, certainly between pages, I think it's like 92 and 96, and it's a bit odd. It feels out of place because it doesn't really do it anywhere else. Off the top of my head, I can't remember what that section was about, but I know I did make a note of it that there could be less technical jargon in that section. One of the other things that he spends a lot of time on, and it's almost one of the things you have to be doing to be considered in any way, shape or form in the upper echelons of the role-playing experience, is engaging in tournament play. And for me, here in the UK, it's kind of unheard of. I mean, most of the people that I know, most of the people that I've played with in over 30 years of doing role-playing games, they're mostly small groups of friends, and it's a very private and personal pastime. There's not so much of a market for these big grand tournaments. Yes, okay, you do get things like Gen Con and things like that, but on a day-to-day basis, it's not really that type of hobby. Now, I wonder why he included that. Is it simply because at the time of writing, role-playing as a pastime had only existed for, 13 years, and he saw it as a way of disseminating the work to a wider audience? I don't know, but he puts a lot of store in it, and also if you're at that level, you should also be engaging in contributing to the hobby as well in terms of articles and things like this. And that's fine, but I disagree. I don't know whether you need to, if you want to do that, and if you can do that, then go right ahead. But I don't think that and being a master player necessarily go hand in hand. I think you can do that and never have any more impact on the gaming landscape as a whole, beyond, playing with the same group of people that you've played with for the past 20 odd years. I think that's perfectly acceptable. Bottom line, I suppose, is, do I think reading this book has made me a better role player? A bit. There are some nice things in here, and there's things in here that I think, whether you're a role player, just a player, or a games master, there's some nice things in here to be reminded of, and a few nice lessons in it, even if it's just a point of looking at things from a different perspective, that are quite nice. That said, though, I do think it falls short of what's promised in the very hyperbolic blurb on the back cover, which is a shame. As I said, there is, as I said, a follow-up to this, so I might check that out and see if that delivers what I was hoping for from this. In terms of, would I recommend that you read it? Yeah. If you're really heavily into your role-playing and you want to find out more, or again, as I say, if you want like an outside perspective on the hobby as a whole, then yeah, give it a look. But I wouldn't say it was required reading just to enjoy what you're doing already. But that said, to finish this on a high note, what I really did like is Gygax's emphasis on how unique a gaming experience role-playing is, in that it is a non-competitive game. You have to cooperate with your fellow players to achieve your goals, and that winning the game isn't the point of the game, it's just having a good time.
Apparently, he had a very good time.
And I think that's really important. That's one of the things, as I say, it's quite ubiquitous in there, and that, I think, is the most important thing. So, with that out of the way, we can turn to my I ratings. And for roleplay mastery, I have given it, for the product itself, as I said, it's okay. So it gets a 2i for that. And for the content as well, it's okay. Well, it's okay. I liked it. So it gets a 3i. So middle of the road for role-playing mastery. But of course, I won't forget this time. I can also take that off the list. There we go, as I said, right above the last one. There. It is gone. Curious enough, we're staying on this side of the page, as we're going to go a couple down for our next book, and this is the last of the collection of books I got from my friend Simon Morgan. And this is Hauntings and Other Fantastic Tales by Vernon Lee. This isn't an author that I'm aware of, which I'm surprised, because I think this was written, or most of these stories come from around the 1890s, so I'm surprised I never heard of him. But yes, so that will be what I will be jumping into next, and back onto my familiar territory of the Gothic. Lovely. So while I dive into this, you can head back to the tavern, enjoy a bite and sup, and get thee gone. Tactics and strategies for achieving. No, it's achieving.
Achieving.
It's achieving.
Okay.
It is now. It's, like the Atreides, it's achieving.
Achieving.